Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents 42 Today, Jackie Robinson and His Legacy. Edited by Michael G. Long. Foreword by Ken Burns, Sarah Burns, and David McMahon. Afterword by Kevin Merida. Narrated by Myron Willis. Foreword. Taking Jackie Robinson seriously. Ken Burns, Sarah Burns, and David McMahon. On April 15th, 1947, Jackie Robinson sent a seismic wave across America with his barrier-breaking first game in Major League Baseball. It was arguably the most significant progress in civil rights since Reconstruction. That summer, Robinson captivated fans with his electrifying blend of speed and power, while meeting the withering barrage of hate he faced on and off the field with quiet restraint. His success made him the most famous black man in America, and paved the way for other talented black players to join him in the integrated big leagues. It's a well-told story, one that in the decades since Robinson's pioneering first season has become almost mythological, and taken on a sentimentality that has blinded us to his true nature and minimized the noxious racism that hardly retreated in his heroic wake. Too often we have remembered him as an unthreatening martyr who turned the other cheek, depended on a helping hand from well-meaning whites. It's a safe and simple narrative that provides white America convenient cover and does a disservice to an uncompromising patriot. It also distracts us from a dark reality. The oppressive conditions Robinson faced across his 53 years, casual and structural, remain as present in society today as they were then. The silent stoicism that marked Jack Roosevelt Robinson's initial year with the Brooklyn Dodgers ran contrary to his character. Stubborn, intelligent, with a fiery temper, and full of deeply held convictions, Robinson had rarely missed an opportunity to speak out against the prejudice and injustice he saw nearly everywhere. Growing up in Depression-era Pasadena, California, he faced down racist neighbors and refused to sit in the segregated section at the movie theater or leave a Woolworth lunch counter until he was served. Once he was arrested for singing a song that a police officer found offensive. Another time, while just a bystander to an argument, an officer rushed in and pulled a gun on Robinson before knowing who was to blame. As a second lieutenant in the U.S. Army during the Second World War, he faced a court-martial after refusing an order from a white civilian bus driver to move to the back of a military bus at Fort Hood, Texas, 10 years before Rosa Parks' own bold act of defiance in Montgomery, Alabama. Brooklyn's general manager, Branch Rickey, a high-minded opportunist, knew of Robinson's scrapes with the law and his early discharge from the U.S. Army before assigning him to the Dodgers. In these incidents, Rickey saw a man of considerable character who, though strong-willed and defiant, would care enough about succeeding that he would, for a time, suppress his natural impulse to fight back, and, during his first few seasons, Robinson mostly did. But once his place in the game was secure, it was no longer necessary for Robinson to keep quiet. As President Barack Obama later observed, Jackie Robinson had purchased the right to speak his mind many times over. Throughout his remaining playing days, Robinson used his enormous fame to bring attention to the countless ways in which his world was patently unjust. He criticized umpires who he believed were treating him unfairly, demanded that hotels provide equal access to him and his black teammates, and accused the New York Yankees of prejudice for failing to promote any black players to their team. When, during a mid-game birthday celebration for the team's Kentucky-born shortstop, Pee Wee Reese, the grounds crew raised a Confederate flag over Ebbets Field, Robinson fumed. Who would ever let Jim Crow back in the ballpark? He asked resentful teammates who were enjoying the festivities. The press, many of whom had once praised him for his self-control, took exception to his outspokenness, calling him ungrateful and urging him to be a baseball player, not a crusader. Bill Keefe, sports editor of the New Orleans Time-Picayune, declared that no 10 of the most rabid segregationists accomplished as much as Robinson did in widening the breach between the white people and Negroes. If you showed anything that suggested dignity, in the sense that you believed in equality, you were immediately undesirable. said Harry Belafonte, referring to Robinson. "There's always going to be a price to pay for any rebel sound that challenges oppression." This, of course, remains true to this day. In 2016, San Francisco 49ers quarterback Colin Kaepernick chose not to stand for the national anthem in protest of police brutality against African Americans. His actions were denounced by star quarterback Drew Brees as disrespectful and criticized by the National Football League as unpatriotic, and President Donald Trump described his dissent as grounds for firing. A free agent the following season, Kaepernick went unsigned, and 3 years later remained out of the league in spite of his earlier success and widely acknowledged talents. Toward the end of his career, when Jackie Robinson and his wife Rachel sought to buy a larger house to accommodate their growing family, they were met with resistance. Touring homes in New York City's northern suburbs, they were glared at by neighbors, denied access by owners, and, in one case, after making an offer, told it was off the market. The effect of such racially restrictive agreements among homeowners, brokers, and community associations, even though in some cases ruled unconstitutional decades earlier, continues to keep neighborhoods segregated and limits the housing opportunities of people of color. After baseball, Robinson wrote hundreds of newspaper columns about inequality and injustice and raised money for the NAACP and Southern Christian Leadership Conference. When Martin Luther King Jr. asked Robinson to help boost morale among civil rights workers in Georgia or Alabama, Jackie took the next available flight. He also sparred with Malcolm X over the direction of the civil rights movement, and later seemed to some out of touch in forcefully dismissing the arguments of younger, more militant activists who had grown frustrated with the slow pace of change, including Muhammad Ali. But Robinson continued to make his voice heard. He stumped for politicians who he believed would best support the interests of African Americans, including Richard Nixon, a decision he later regretted. At the 1964 Republican National Convention, Robinson attended as a special delegate, rallying a tiny band of African Americans who were abandoned when the party lurched sharply to the right. The eventual nominee was Barry Goldwater, who had voted against the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and whose supporters included the John Birch Society and the Ku Klux Klan. At a rally outside the convention, Robinson thundered his disapproval. "I am an American Negro first, before I am a member of any party," he told the audience. "We will not stand silently for any major party, nominating a man who, in my opinion, is a bigot, and a man who will attempt to prevent us from moving forward." That fall, Lyndon Johnson trounced Barry Goldwater at the polls. More than 50 years later, the Party of Lincoln continued to find support among far-right organizations standing for white supremacy. In 2017, when hate groups gathered in Charlottesville, Virginia, to rally against the removal of a monument to Confederate Commander Robert E. Lee, President Donald Trump, a Republican, declined to condemn the marchers after their gathering resulted in deadly violence. If we are serious about the kind of meaningful change Jackie Robinson campaigned for, both on and off the field, and before, as well as long after his monumental Major League debut, we should remember him in full, celebrate his outspokenness, and acknowledge that many of the obstacles he faced as a black man in America remain fixed, blocking the path to first-class citizenship for African Americans. Introduction. That Day. Michael G. Long. A life is not important, except in the impact it has on others. These are the familiar words engraved on Jackie Robinson's tombstone in Cypress Hills Cemetery in Brooklyn, not far from where he began his public campaign to redeem the racist soul of America. Robinson's signature, with its soft curves and loops, appears below the chiseled words, authorizing the wisdom as his own. There's no citation on the headstone, of course, but the statement comes from the epilogue to I Never Had It Made, Robinson's final book, a searing account of his life on and beyond the baseball diamond. In this same book are those other memorable words, quoted so many times after NFL quarterback Colin Kaepernick took a knee during the national anthem. I cannot stand and sing the anthem. I cannot salute the flag. I know that I am a black man in a white world. Published in 1972, I Never Had It Made offers remarkable insight into the frustrations Robinson felt near the end of his life. With diabetes ravaging his body, he was benched, far from the center of action, when he learned about Richard Nixon's attack on busing for the purpose of desegregating public schools, about Republican plans to slash welfare, and about the brutal response to the uprising at Attica Prison. These were not easy days for someone long accustomed to creating opportunities and forcing results, from a stolen home plate in the World Series to the opening of a bank in Harlem. Robinson's voice in I Never Had It Made often reveals fury and frustration, disgust and disappointment, and anger and annoyance. Because Alfred Duckett wrote the text, the book lists the author as Jackie Robinson as told to Alfred Duckett. It's unclear whether the tone throughout is Robinson's or Duckett's, though perhaps it belongs to both men, steeped as they were in the white backlash of the Nixon era. It would come as no surprise if the book's fury, especially over the flag, was solely Robinson's. In a July 1969 interview with the New York Times, the American icon sounded a similar note. I wouldn't fly the flag on the 4th of July or any other day, he said. When I see a car with a flag pasted on it, I figure the guy behind the wheel isn't my friend. Robinson was chairman of the Freedom National Bank in Harlem at this point, and he believed that the flag had become a captive to the conservative movement, with its emphasis on law and order, its opposition to ongoing demands from the civil rights movement, and its support for the Vietnam War. Robinson was not a vocal opponent of the war, but he scoffed at the notion that love of country should translate into uncritical support for the policies of the new President Richard Nixon. Robinson's scorching comments about the flag in 1969 and in his final book seem a sharp contrast to the patriotism he displayed in his testimony against Paul Robeson at a 1949 hearing of the House Un-American Activities Committee, or in his praise of democracy in a fawning 1956 letter to President Eisenhower, or even in his defense against Malcolm X's mocking of America in 1963. But Robinson's patriotism, formed in the crucible of Jim Crow America, including a racist Fort Riley in Kansas during World War II, was always a volatile mix of praise and criticism, with an extra heavy dose of the latter. Rachel Robinson was not a fan when she read her husband's comments about the national anthem in I Never Had It Made, nor was she pleased to learn that more than a few writers cited her husband's words in an effort to defend and legitimize Kaepernick's protest. When asked whether Jack, she called him Jack rather than Jackie, would approve of Kaepernick's knee-taking, she said she didn't think he would, though she quickly added that she could not speak for her deceased husband. Although Rachel's opinion might raise a few eyebrows, given Jack's own statement about not standing for the national anthem, it's in direct line with her long-time efforts to shape her husband's legacy in a way that shows him as more than the man who appears in I Never Had It Made. Rachel has focused particularly on countering claims that her husband was angry on and off the field. After the release of the film 42, she stated that those who think of Jack as angry on the baseball diamond are flat out wrong. Sometimes people attribute Jack's actions to anger, she said. When he played, he was assertive. But all too often people equate assertiveness on the part of black males as anger and aggression. And that wasn't Jack. She made a similar point in the Ken Burns film, Jackie Robinson. He was not an angry black man. He was an athlete who wanted to win. And in 1997, long before the release of either film, she said, as people discuss Jack, it's often as a martyr. They overlook the joys he had, the exhilaration of winning, the joys of his children and his home. This book challenges Rachel's claim that Jack wasn't angry, and it does not correct the lack of attention to his joyful side. Rachel herself has already done exactly that in Jackie Robinson, An Intimate Portrait, a delightful book that includes stories and reflections that reveal the joyful side of Robinson's life as a husband, father, friend, athlete, and activist. Sharon Robinson offers a similar perspective in Stealing Home, an intimate family portrait by the daughter of Jackie Robinson. Sharon's other books, many of them published by Scholastic, as well as her numerous public comments, have consistently characterized Jackie as a generous father to his children and a favorite father in the family's former neighborhood in Stamford, Connecticut. Like Rachel, Sharon does not suggest Jackie was the perfect father. He had trouble, especially when dealing with Jackie Jr., but her belief that her father created a legacy of love is unwavering. This book does, however, support Rachel's other primary goal when advancing her husband's legacy, to depict Jack as more than the black man who shattered the color barrier in Major League Baseball in 1947. The esteemed contributors to this volume, filmmakers, writers, journalists, scholars, and activists, add depth and nuance to the Jackie Robinson that our culture has unjustly frozen in 1947. The silent warrior who courageously used nonviolence, the nice young man who turned the other cheek, the polite player whose easy smile has graced countless children's books ever since. Although our book does indeed address the legacy of the silent warrior, as well as the ways that Robinson transformed Major League Baseball, it does so in a way that deconstructs the self-congratulatory myth that the smiling, easygoing, non-threatening Jackie Robinson of 1947 is concrete evidence that we have largely overcome America's original sin. We also dive deep into Robinson's overlooked legacy in civil rights, politics, and the wider sports world. By exploring his legacy in all its complexity, we show Jackie Robinson not as the one-dimensional figure highlighted in so many annual tributes to his sacrifice in 1947, but as a complicated man who left multiple legacies, on and off the field, that defy easy characterization. Robinson lived such a large life, moving in and out of so many fields, that it would be wrong-headed to force all of his contributions into something called the Jackie Robinson legacy. Legacies are never easy to describe with accuracy and certainty. They're like moral character, best viewed from many different angles, in historical context, and over a long period. Like studies of character, explorations of legacies also leads to a culminating question. Is there anything that ties the different parts together? In this case, is there a unifying element in the various legacies that Robinson left us? Although the answer to this question will emerge throughout this book, Robinson's own reflections in the epilogue to I Never Had It Made hint at the answer. Life owes me nothing. Baseball owes me nothing. But I cannot, as an individual, rejoice in the good things I have been permitted to work for and learn, while the humblest of my brothers is down in a deep hole, hollering for help and not being heard. That is why I have devoted and dedicated my life to service. I don't like to be in debt, and I still feel I owe till every man can rent and lease and buy according to his money and desires, until every child can have an equal opportunity in youth and manhood, until hunger is not only immoral, but illegal, until hatred is recognized as a disease, a scourge, an epidemic, and treated as such, until racism and sexism and narcotics are conquered, and until every man can vote, and any man can be elected if he qualifies. Until that day, Jackie Robinson and no one else can say he has it made. Robinson's fervent commitment to serving the humblest, those who lacked the privilege he enjoyed, especially poor black people, is the one thread that ties together the many moving parts of his large life. If this becomes clear in the book ahead, so too will the unfortunate fact that Robinson's life of service has not yet yielded the results he so aggressively fought for and desperately craved. Robinson devoted himself to a life of service whose goal was, as he put it, that day, a time and place free of poverty, discrimination, and hatred, and full of equal opportunity and enfranchisement. Robinson's That Day, like Martin Luther King Jr.'s beloved community, was nowhere in sight during his lifetime, and neither is it now. The legacy of Jackie Robinson, like King's, remains unfulfilled. Perhaps more troubling to the optimists among us is that we have no reason to suggest that Robinson, like the ever-hopeful King, believed that day would really arrive in human history. Robinson's eschatology was not nearly as optimistic as King's. Nevertheless, you who enter this book need not abandon all hope, if for no other reason than that an abundance of evidence presented in this book reveals that Robinson acted as if that day was still worthy of relentless pursuit, even if it was not realizable in human history. At last, then, the legacy of Jackie Robinson remains unfulfilled, and perhaps it will always be so. But it's still an urgent invitation, or better yet, a demand to pursue the impossible anyway, even unto death. Note to the listener: there is a rough chronological order to this book, even though the writings are organized topically, making it possible for you to listen to them out of order without the threat of missing a coherent biographical narrative. If you wish to read a substantive overview of Robinson's life as you begin this book, you can find one in Peter Dreyer's chapter on Robinson's legacy in The Wide World of Sports. Unlike the other chapters, Dreyer's offers a detailed account of Robinson's life. Part 1. Foundations. Chapter 1. The Owner. Howard Bryant. One of the great mysteries of the Jackie Robinson story is where it came from. His uncompromising sense of equality, his belief that no one is inherently better than anyone else, and certainly black people were not inferior to anyone. His insistence that he and all of the black people like him were entitled to the rights and courtesies of full citizenship. His insistence on ownership, of his person, of his environment, of his share of the American dream. His position that black people were not making a request to be considered, but were assuming access to an inalienable necessity. One doesn't ask permission to breathe. The old stories of his early encounters with racism and his willingness to fight are well documented, from the time he countered the young white girl in Pasadena, who called him a nigger by calling her a cracker, only to have her checkmate him with the rhyme, "Soda crackers good to eat, niggers only good to beat," to the time with the Kansas City Monarchs, when he pulled the hose out of the gas tank from a merchant who would take their money but wouldn't let the members of the Black Ball Club use the men's room. Each reinforced the Robinson traits that would become his hallmark, but less certain was what created it, who instilled it, and how and why it remained when so often others who possessed the same instincts were left on the roadside, permanently broken. The world Robinson entered was not welcoming to black service or sacrifice abroad. He was born in January 1919, just 2.5 months after the armistice. Black American GIs had done their part in World War I, and for their blood, black people were expected to return to their place, subservient to whites, unexpected to aspire, and discouraged to consider it an option. Violence was the primary weapon for the discouragement, used to police black aspirations, physically in the present by threat of murder, psychologically in the future by making black people ask if self-determination was worth their lives. When Robinson was 6 months old in July 1919, 17-year-old Eugene Williams was stoned by Chicago whites for swimming in a segregated area of Lake Michigan and drowned after being hit. When police refused to arrest the perpetrators, black people protested. After they protested, white Chicagoans killed and burned black homes on the South Side. The Chicago riots of 1919, the history books would call it, and 23 blacks and 15 whites were killed in a week. There was Chicago, and Omaha, and Washington, D.C., and Knoxville. Incidents varying the same theme, hostile white response to the black presence for jobs, housing, opportunity. Robinson was in diapers during Red Summer. The summer of 1919, marked by blood shed by blacks killed for aspiring, for doing, when Robinson couldn't yet walk, what he would embody once he could. Whites returned home from World War I to a competitive job market and an influx of blacks. Economic anxiety provided an incubator for racism and murder. 2 years later, whites infamously raided the Greenwood district in Tulsa, known as Black Wall Street. It was not a riot, where two sides resorted to armed conflict, or an insurrection by the people put down by the state. This was a massacre, where whites shot and killed hundreds and burned black aspiration, buildings and flesh, to the ground. By the time Robinson was 14 in 1933, the National Football League had made its unofficial ban of black players official, joining baseball as another professional sport unavailable to black athletes. Surrounding Robinson was a specific form of American terrorism with a specific aim: to demoralize a people who had believed they were not given the handout of citizenship, but had earned it through loyalty and blood. America was talking to its black people, telling them the American ideal of betterment through hard work, assimilation, did not apply to them, and they were determined to prove it, using arson, terrorism, and murder as primary tools. The strong figures in his life, his mother Mally, his sister Willa Mae, his brothers Frank and Mac, his mentor Reverend Carl Downs, and, of course, his wife Rachel, built in Robinson a strong man, and had his mandate of urgency, of owning a piece of the elusive ideal, been shared by his country, considered an asset even, perhaps the Robinson family influence would have better explained his foundation. Perhaps it would have even been celebrated as the kindling of his rebelliousness, providing an admirable model for others facing the psychological intimidation and the physical evidence of maimed and killed bodies. But the mandate was not shared by his country. The country wanted him to be patient, a credit to his race, accepting of glacial change as progress. And it was here where the Jackie Robinson narrative would be appropriated, rerouted, detoured along a different, accommodating pathway. He would become synonymous with not ownership, which is taken with pageantry, but advancement, which is granted. He would be recast as one small but outsized piece in the long struggle toward freedom, in the martyr's path, where the reward of his sacrifice would be enjoyed not by him, but by some unknown generation at some undetermined period in the future. Advancement is the historical path of black people and the preferred narrative of whites who are afforded a wide berth. They can be deliberate. They can be patient. They need not sacrifice in the short term, provided they agree to a covenant of fairness to be delivered at an unspecified date, as long as it's not today. And they can dole out the platitudes about Robinson's dignity, for they are not threatened with the sharing that comes with ownership, the partnership with power. Robinson and his wife living with a black family on the outskirts of town in spring training was framed as a sacrifice, pitied as an injustice, but not an offense to be immediately remedied. When Robinson integrated eating facilities at the Chase Hotel in St. Louis by taking Rachel to the dining room, refusing the hotel's directives that he and his wife eat their meals in their room as a condition of allowing him to stay with his own team, the historical framing of that moment placed Robinson as defiant. It placed the moment as triumphant, another subtle step toward equality. It was a victory for advancement. Ownership is quite different, for it takes the keys to the house of self-determination in real time, without asking, and does not offer points for compromise or patience. Either one is an American, or one is not an American. And if one is an American, other Americans are not to be commended for the grand gesture of treating an American as one. When Robinson once played an exhibition in the South, the black fans cheered when they were allowed to sit in the grandstand instead of the bleachers, the usual colored seats. Robinson was infuriated. "Don't cheer, those goddamn bastards! Keep your fucking mouths shut! You got it coming. Don't cheer!" Being refunded one's own money is not a commendable act, but an obviously unremarkable one, unless the cultural subtext.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?